15 actors, 15 wigs, 15 careers that would have been finished the second the toupee slipped. John Barrymore. Audiences called him the great profile for his sharp features and romantic style, but by the end of the silent era, Barrymore was losing something else. His hair. Years of heavy drinking and stress made his hairline retreat fast. To keep his image alive, studios turned to wigs. By the late 1920s, almost every major picture had him wearing one. In Don Juan and Beau Brummel, his slick hair on screen was a carefully fitted piece. Off-set, friends saw a balding man who looked far older than his age. Barrymore was proud, but he was also practical. He knew fans expected a leading man with charm, not a receding crown. Studio photographers never released a portrait without the wig in place. Publicity stills were airbrushed to hide any hint of baldness. His reliance grew as he aged. In the 1930s, when his drinking spiraled, the wigs became a shield. They gave him the romantic image he could no longer naturally maintain. Boris Karloff. By the time he stepped into Hollywood horror, he was already dealing with thinning hair. Instead of hiding it, makeup artists built his look around wigs. His career took off in 1931 with Frankenstein, and the shocking flat-topped hairstyle was not his own. Jack Pierce, Universal's makeup genius, glued on heavy wigs, added layers of padding, and even bolted pieces to Karloff's head to sell the monster's image. The wigs didn't stop with Frankenstein. In The Mummy, his bald head was wrapped and then covered with aged, wiry hairpieces to create the illusion of an ancient priest. Each horror role demanded a different kind of wig, from sleek styles to wild, frayed locks. What most people forget is that Karloff's natural hairline was already vanishing. So the wigs weren't just for monsters, they kept him versatile. Behind the scenes, Karloff was methodical about the process. He sat for hours while pieces were applied, often arriving before dawn. Crew members remembered him chain-smoking during these sessions, calm while layers of hair, wax, and paint turned him into something unrecognizable. By the time the camera rolled, his own baldness was hidden under yards of synthetic hair. Edward G. Robinson. He was short, stocky, and by the early 1930s his hairline was already on retreat, but Warner Brothers saw something in him, the perfect gangster. To sell the image, they turned to toupees. Robinson's slick, well-kept hair on screen was carefully crafted, not natural. In Little Caesar, 1931, the film that made him a star, the toupee was as important as the suit and the gun. Off-camera, Robinson had a receding crown that made him look older. On camera, with the toupee in place, he was hard, stylish, and unforgettable. Warner publicity departments kept the illusion tight. Studio portraits were always taken with the piece styled perfectly. Robinson himself treated it as part of the job. He was meticulous about appearance, often working with stylists to adjust the fit before a take. Co-stars later admitted they rarely saw him bareheaded during production. In an industry obsessed with youth and style, he knew that without the toupee, he risked losing roles to younger actors. The reliance continued throughout his career. Even in the 1940s, as his fame shifted to character parts, Robinson rarely appeared without a hairpiece. By then, it was less about vanity and more about continuity. Charles Boyer. Studio executives in the 1930s wanted romance, and they found it in a French import whose voice alone could melt audiences. What they didn't want anyone to notice was that Charles Boyer's hair was thinning fast. By his early 40s, wigs were part of his daily screen image. In films like Algiers, 1938, the wig wasn't just a prop, it was central to his appeal. The slick, dark hair, carefully shaped and parted, matched the stereotype of a European seducer. Without it, Boyer looked much older than the character the studio was selling. Hollywood understood that illusion was everything, and Boyer leaned into it. Publicity stills told the same story. Photographers shot him under flattering lights with the hairpiece brushed perfectly in place. Fan magazines praised his suave style, rarely hinting that the style came from a wig stand between shoots. Colleagues recalled he was rarely seen on set without the piece, even when cameras weren't rolling. For Boyer, the toupees worked. They allowed him to keep leading roles well into the 1940s, long past the age when many foreign-born stars were pushed aside. His romantic image stayed intact because audiences never questioned the hair. But in private, he was less guarded. Friends noted he sometimes went without the wig at social gatherings, a reminder that off-screen he was a middle-aged man rather than the eternal lover. Paul Muni. Hollywood called him the man of 1,000 faces, and wigs were the secret behind that reputation. Paul Muni wasn't only covering a thinning hairline, he was using hairpieces as part of a full-body transformation in nearly every role he played. In Scarface, 1932, his dark, slicked wig helped sell him as a ruthless gangster. A few years later, in The Story of Louis Pasteur, 1936, the hairpiece changed again, giving him the look of the famed scientist. Each wig was tailored not just to hide baldness, but to mold Muni into someone new. Makeup departments loved him for this. He was one of the few actors willing to sit through hours of preparation, adjusting hairlines, sideburns, and curls until the illusion felt authentic. The result was a chameleon effect that audiences bought without question. His Academy Award for Pasteur came with a look built entirely out of wigs and makeup. Behind the curtain, colleagues said Muni never cared much about his own appearance. He wore the wigs without ego, treating them like tools rather than vanity props. Off-set, he was content to let his natural thinning hair show. On screen, though, he became anyone the role demanded. The approach set him apart from many leading men of his time. While others fought to preserve youth, Muni used wigs to disappear. His hairpieces didn't just keep him handsome, they made him unrecognizable from one picture to the next. Claude Rains. The camera never showed it, but Claude Rains was already balding when audiences first heard his voice in The Invisible Man, 1933. Underneath the bandages and dark glasses was an actor who rarely stepped in front of a lens without a carefully prepared wig. Rains treated hairpieces as part of his costume, whether it was the polished politician in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, 1939, or the slippery Captain Renault in Casablanca, 1942. Each role demanded a different look. Lace-front wigs gave him versatility, allowing directors to present him as elegant, sinister, or charming, depending on the part. Crews remembered his strict attention to detail. The wigs were styled with precision, often adjusted between takes. Rains insisted on perfection because he knew audiences expected consistency. He was a character actor who could slip into many roles, but the illusion only worked if the hairline matched the character. Off-set, he was more relaxed. Friends and colleagues noted that he didn't hide his baldness at private gatherings, but in front of the camera, he refused to compromise. For Rains, the wig wasn't vanity, it was professionalism. His careful use of hairpieces meant viewers rarely questioned his appearance. Even as he aged into the 1940s and 50s, the transition was hidden by subtle adjustments in style and color. The public image stayed intact, while the real man beneath grew older and balder. For him, it was never about fooling people into thinking he was young again. It was about serving the character so completely that audiences forgot they were looking at an actor at all. Charles Laughton. Few actors embraced wigs with the same ease as Charles Laughton. His Shakespearean training meant he was used to slipping into elaborate hairpieces long before Hollywood demanded it. By the time he arrived in films, he was already balding, and wigs became second nature. When he played King Henry VIII in 1933, the transformation was unforgettable. The bulky frame, the regal robes, and the carefully sculpted red wig gave audiences a monarch they believed. 2 years later, in Mutiny on the Bounty, 1935, he shed the kingly look for a severe, tightly styled wig as Captain Bligh. Each hairpiece was tailored to the role, a tool that let him swing from tyrant to buffoon without breaking character. Crew members recalled that Laughton never complained about the long preparation. The wig fittings were part of his ritual, as important as rehearsing lines. His approach was practical. He knew his bald head limited casting options, so he leaned into the illusion instead of resisting it. Even off-screen, the wigs followed him. Studio portraits and publicity tours kept the polished image alive. Fans saw a versatile star who seemed to age and change at will, unaware that wigs were doing much of the heavy lifting. He used wigs to vanish into history, literature, and legend. From kings to mutineers, the hair was never really his, but the performances were unforgettable. Basil Rathbone. Audiences knew him best as Sherlock Holmes, but that sleek, aristocratic look wasn't entirely his own. Basil Rathbone's natural hair thinned during the late 1930s, and the sharp detective silhouette relied heavily on wigs. In the Holmes series, produced between 1939 and 1946, Rathbone's profile became iconic. The deerstalker hat and pipe were props, but so was the carefully styled dark wig that gave him a youthful, intellectual edge. Without it, Holmes might have looked tired rather than razor-sharp. The wigs also helped him stay versatile. Earlier in his career, he played swashbuckling villains in The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938, and Captain Blood, 1935. For those roles, studios demanded long, flowing locks, something Rathbone couldn't naturally provide. Costume departments built elaborate hairpieces to give him the menacing flair audiences loved. Co-stars later joked about the irony. On stage or screen, Rathbone's villains often lost their fights, but in real life, it was baldness he was battling. Wigs gave him the weapons he needed to keep playing swordsmen, detectives, and dignitaries well into the 1940s. Public appearances kept the illusion going. Photographers rarely caught him without the pieces, and press materials polished his image as if his hair were untouched by age. Behind the curtain, though, it was clear that wigs were as much a part of Rathbone's toolkit as his clip delivery and fencing skills. For audiences, the deception worked perfectly. They saw the hair as natural, never questioning how much work went into maintaining the illusion. Gene Lockhart. Character actors rarely got the same attention as leading men, but they carried their own pressures. For Gene Lockhart, that meant covering a bald crown with wigs in nearly every major role of his career. Audiences might remember him as Bob Cratchit in A Christmas Carol, 1938, or as Judge Harper in Miracle on 34th Street, 1947. In both cases, his hair was studio-made. Publicity stills from those productions show Lockhart with a neat, full head of hair, even though colleagues later confirmed he was already bald underneath. Studios expected him to maintain a consistent image. Unlike a star who could reinvent himself, Lockhart was always cast as kindly fathers, stern officials, or middle-aged professionals. Each part required the look of a man still holding on to his hair. Costume departments kept racks of wigs ready, styled to fit whichever role he stepped into. Off-set, Lockhart was less concerned. Friends and theater companions recalled seeing him without the hairpieces in private. He treated them as tools, not part of his personal identity. But when it came to the camera, he complied with studio demands. The wig was as much a requirement as a costume or a script. What made Lockhart stand out was how invisible the deception was. He wasn't playing dashing leads, so audiences rarely thought about his appearance. The wigs blended so smoothly into his everyman roles that few suspected anything artificial. Edward Arnold. Powerful voices and commanding presence made Edward Arnold a natural fit for political figures and wealthy tycoons. What audiences didn't realize was that much of that presence relied on wigs. By the mid-1930s, Arnold was fully bald, but MGM wanted him to project authority with a full head of hair. In Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, 1939, Arnold played the corrupt Senator Payne. His polished, neatly combed wig helped sell the image of a man with dignity and status. The studio knew a bald head might weaken the illusion, so they made sure he was always wigged, both on screen and in promotional photos. He was professional, never fussy about the fittings, but always insistent on quality. Costume designers recalled that his hairpieces were maintained with the same care as wardrobe. Every strand had to sit just right, because Arnold understood how much authority came from appearance. Public audiences rarely caught on. His weight and booming delivery drew attention away from his hair, which blended seamlessly into each role. On screen, he looked like a man in his prime. In reality, he had been bald for years. Unlike some actors who wore toupees off-set, Arnold didn't make them part of his personal life. Colleagues said he was comfortable bareheaded among friends, but in front of a camera, he never went without. To the studios, the hair was non-negotiable. Fred Astaire. Graceful dancing distracted audiences from many things, but it couldn't hide Fred Astaire's thinning hair. By the 1940s, hairpieces had become part of his screen image, just like top hats and tails. In Blue Skies, 1946, and later Daddy Longlegs, 1955, Astaire appeared with a sleek, carefully combed wig that added to his elegant style. Studio stylists worked hard to match his natural hairline, making sure the piece didn't shift during strenuous dance numbers. The illusion needed to hold up under bright lights and long takes, and audiences never suspected the extra help. Astaire himself was pragmatic about it. He didn't see the toupees as vanity, but as part of the costume. Colleagues recalled him treating wigs the same way he treated tap shoes, tools that completed the performance. Without them, he risked looking older than the romantic roles he was expected to play. Publicity photos followed the same script. The smooth-haired Astaire was always front and center in studio campaigns. Magazines called him ageless, rarely hinting at the bald truth beneath the hairpiece. Offset, though, friends said he was far less concerned and often went without. The consistency of his wigs helped maintain a career that spanned decades. Astaire could still partner with younger actresses well into the 1950s because audiences believed in the polished image. In reality, the elegance was sustained by more than dance technique. James Stewart. The folksy charm of James Stewart made him a Hollywood favorite, but by the end of the 1940s his hair had noticeably thinned. Studios stepped in with wigs and toupees to keep him looking younger on screen, especially in films that demanded a romantic lead. In It's a Wonderful Life, 1946, Stewart still had enough natural hair, though stylists boosted it with fillers and careful lighting. But as the years passed, particularly during the 1950s, he relied more on hairpieces. Westerns like Winchester 73, 1950, and The Man from Laramie, 1955, featured Stewart in rugged roles where a strong silhouette mattered. The toupees weren't flashy, just practical, blending into the dust and grit of the frontier. Colleagues remembered that Stewart didn't fuss over his appearance. He accepted the wigs as part of the job, rarely making a scene about fittings. For him, it was about continuity. Audiences had grown up with the image of a tall, youthful everyman. Baldness might have broken that illusion, and Stewart was too professional to let it show. Publicity departments helped smooth the story. Promotional portraits showed him with a full, clean hairline, even when the reality was different. Fans, loyal to his wholesome image, rarely questioned it. The illusion was subtle enough to pass without comment. What mattered to Hollywood wasn't whether Stewart was bald. It was that he still looked like the dependable man next door, the one audiences trusted to carry their stories. Ray Milland. Winning an Academy Award in 1945 for The Lost Weekend cemented Ray Milland as one of Paramount's top stars. What audiences didn't see was that his hairline was already in retreat, and wigs were quietly becoming part of his professional image. After his Oscar win, Milland transitioned into thrillers and noirs, where appearance mattered. Films like The Big Clock, 1948, and Dial M for Murder, 1954, featured him with a full, slick style that looked natural on screen. In reality, the studio stylists were supplying carefully fitted toupees to maintain that illusion. Without them, Milland risked looking older than the romantic or suspenseful roles he was given. The pressure was clear in publicity campaigns. Paramount presented him as a polished leading man, hairline intact in every magazine spread and studio portrait. By then, the wigs weren't optional. They were part of the image that kept Milland bankable. Colleagues later recalled that Milland handled the process with quiet professionalism. He wasn't vain about it, nor embarrassed. For him, the hairpiece was just another tool, no different than wardrobe or makeup. What mattered was delivering the performance while the studio handled appearances. The strategy worked. Milland held on to prominent roles through the 1950s, longer than many contemporaries who faded once age began to show. The wigs gave audiences the illusion of continuity, and his sharp acting did the rest. Fred MacMurray. Disney fans might remember him as the genial father in My Three Sons, while earlier audiences saw him as a romantic lead in comedies and thrillers. In both phases of his career, Fred MacMurray's hair was often more costume than natural. By the late 1940s, his hairline had started to thin. To keep him bankable, studios provided wigs that matched the wholesome, all-American image they marketed. In Double Indemnity, 1944, his smooth, confident salesman look came with help from a carefully fitted toupee. The piece blended so seamlessly with his natural hair that few viewers questioned it. The practice carried into his television years. On My Three Sons, 1960-1972, MacMurray appeared with a consistent, neatly styled head of hair even as he aged past 60. Off-screen, friends and colleagues knew he had gone mostly bald, but the studio never allowed that image to reach audiences. The show's family-friendly brand relied on the illusion of a steady, youthful father figure. MacMurray himself wasn't known for fussing about appearances. He treated wigs the same way he treated wardrobe changes, necessary but not worth dwelling on. He often joked about Hollywood's obsession with hair, but he still wore the pieces whenever the cameras rolled. Public reactions were non-existent at the time because the deception was so well managed. Only in later years did photos emerge showing the difference between the private man and the polished television star. For audiences of the era, MacMurray was exactly what the screen promised: clean-cut, dependable, and always perfectly groomed. Yul Brynner. Few actors turned baldness into a trademark, but before that transformation, Yul Brynner actually wore wigs. Early in his career, Hollywood executives weren't convinced audiences would accept a shaved head. Test fittings were done with slick dark hair pieces, and publicity photos sometimes showed him in styles that were never natural. Everything changed with The King and I, 1951. Brynner shaved his head for the Broadway role and carried the look into the film adaptation 5 years later. Studios initially worried, even pushing him to try wigs again for screen tests. Brynner resisted, insisting the bald head gave the king his power. He was right. The look became iconic, winning him an Oscar in 1956. Despite that breakthrough, there are records of him briefly returning to wigs for other roles when producers demanded it. In certain costume dramas, directors felt the characters required a full head of hair. Brynner went along, but he always returned to the shaved scalp as soon as the job ended. Off-screen, he leaned into baldness. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Brynner made no secret of it. In interviews, he even joked about his freedom from worrying about hairpieces. By the late 1950s, his bold choice turned into a trend. Younger actors saw that audiences would accept baldness if it came with charisma and confidence. Where earlier stars had to hide baldness with wigs to protect their careers, he proved it could become a strength. The smooth, bare head became one of the most recognizable images of mid-century cinema. They commanded the screen, made millions swoon, built empires on perfect images, but beneath those famous hairstyles lurked Hollywood's most elaborate deception. A conspiracy so vast it required entire departments to maintain. These weren't just wigs, they were career-saving lies that fooled 3 generations. The studio contracts had special clauses. Hair stylists signed NDAs. Photographers were threatened with lawsuits if they mentioned the word. What you're about to learn will change how you see every classic film. The voice had no hair. Frank Sinatra's transformation wasn't just musical, it was follicular. By 1954, when he won his Oscar for From Here to Eternity, Sinatra was already wearing hairpieces. The skinny kid from Hoboken had lost most of his hair by his early 40s, but Old Blue Eyes had something else going for him: Old Blue Scalp. The Rat Pack knew. Dean Martin would make oblique jokes about Frank's little helper up top during their Vegas shows. Audiences laughed, not getting it. Sammy Davis Jr. later revealed Sinatra traveled with multiple hairpieces, one for performing, one for filming, one for casual wear. Each cost what most Americans made in 6 months. His valet, George Jacobs, had a specific routine. The hairpieces were treated like crown jewels, temperature-controlled storage, special cleaning solutions, custom stands to maintain their shape. Sinatra once sent his hairpiece in a box to Dean Martin with a note. Even it needed a day off. But here's what the publicity machine never told you. Sinatra's hairpieces evolved with technology. The early ones from 1954 used crude adhesives that would fail under hot stage lights. By the 1960s, he had Swiss-made pieces with individual hairs knotted into silk bases. The cost? $10,000 each in today's money. His makeup artist kept emergency supplies. extra strength powder for hot days, baby wipes for between takes, spirit gum strong enough to withstand a hurricane. Because if that hairpiece shifted during a performance, careers would end. The television specials required special preparation. Low angles were forbidden. Overhead lighting was carefully managed. NBC had standing orders, no shots from behind unless Frank approved them first. The control room had a dedicated person watching for hairpiece issues. By his final performances in the 1990s, Sinatra's hairpiece had become almost comically obvious, but no one dared mention it. The emperor had no hair, but the kingdom pretended not to notice. Even in death, the myth persisted. Some say he was buried wearing his best piece. God's comedian wore a wig. George Burns lived to 100. His hairpiece lasted almost as long. The cigar-smoking comedian started losing his hair in vaudeville long before television existed. By the time he became a household name in the 1950s, his scalp was as bare as his humor was sharp. Burns approached his baldness differently than other stars. He didn't hide from it backstage. Crew members would see him without his toupee between takes. He'd use it as a prop during rehearsals, sometimes placing it on his knee and talking to it like a pet. His wife, Gracie Allen, never mentioned it publicly, not once in their entire career together. Their radio show ran for years. Their television show made them legends. Through it all, she maintained the fiction that her husband had a full head of hair. Even in their private correspondence, she never acknowledged it. The Burns and Allen show required special techniques. The cameras of early television were unforgiving. Burns's hairpiece needed constant adjustment between scenes. The show's director developed a system of hand signals to alert the makeup department when the piece was shifting. When Gracie died in 1964, something changed in Burns. He stopped caring as much about the illusion. The hairpieces became more obvious, sometimes deliberately so. He'd adjust it mid-performance for laughs. He was breaking the fourth wall before anyone had a name for it. His comeback in The Sunshine Boys required a new hairpiece. The old ones looked too young for a man playing his age. The makeup department created one with gray streaks and a receding hairline. A toupee designed to look like an old man's toupee. The irony wasn't lost on Burns. By Oh God in 1977, Burns was wearing his hairpiece like armor. It had become part of his character. Audiences knew, critics knew, everyone knew. But the knowledge had transformed from a secret to a shared joke. He'd lived long enough for his deception to become charming. The final years saw Burns performing with increasingly obvious hairpieces. They'd shift during his act. Sometimes they'd sit slightly off-center. He didn't care. At 95, still performing, he'd earned the right to wear whatever he wanted on his head, real or otherwise. The bonanza of baldness. Lorne Greene ruled the Ponderosa for 14 years, but the patriarch of Bonanza was hiding something under that cowboy hat. By the time he was cast as Ben Cartwright in 1959, Greene's natural hairline had retreated past the point of no return. NBC executives panicked when they saw his screen test without the hairpiece. The rugged father figure they'd envisioned looked more like a tired accountant. They invested in the best hairpieces money could buy. Custom-made, hand-ventilated, designed to withstand Nevada desert heat and horse-riding scenes. The Bonanza set had protocols: no publicity photos without the hairpiece properly secured, no behind-the-scenes footage during touch-ups. The makeup trailer had a dedicated section just for Greene's hair management. 3 identical backups were always ready. Michael Landon knew, Dan Blocker knew, Pernell Roberts knew. But on set, they maintained the fiction. During the famous fight scenes, stunt coordinators had to account for the hairpiece. One wrong punch could expose everything. They developed special techniques, controlled falls, strategic camera angles, anything to keep that hairpiece in place. The piece required 2 hours of maintenance daily, cleaning, styling, reattaching loose hairs. The studio employed a specialist whose only job was managing Greene's hairpiece. This person traveled with the production, lived on location, had a salary higher than most of the supporting cast. Green's voice helped sell the illusion. That deep, commanding baritone made you forget to look at his hairline. He could read the phone book and sound like God himself. The voice distracted from what was happening on top of his head. It was psychological misdirection at its finest. Location shoots created nightmares. Wind was the enemy. Rain was catastrophic. The famous Ponderosa exterior shots required multiple takes not for acting, but for hair continuity. If you watch closely, you can see Green's hand subtly checking his hairpiece between lines. When Bonanza ended in 1973, Green continued wearing hairpieces for every role. Battlestar, Galactica, Code Red, even his nature documentaries. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation kept footage of him without the hairpiece. It never aired. Some things were too shocking for television. The irony, Green had one of the most recognizable faces in America. Millions of fans thought they knew him, but they'd never actually seen him. Not really. They'd seen a carefully constructed image held together with spirit gum and wishful thinking. Dancing without natural hair. Fred Astaire revolutionized dance on film. Every move was perfect, every step precisely placed. But the most impressive choreography happened on top of his head. Astaire had been balding since his 20s. By the time he reached Hollywood, he needed assistance to maintain his image. The challenge was unprecedented. How do you keep a hairpiece attached during spins, leaps, and upside-down dancing? The answer required innovation. Max Factor himself got involved. They developed adhesives that could withstand perspiration and rapid movement, space-age technology before the space age. Astaire's hairpieces were engineering marvels, silk bases instead of standard lace, individual hairs knotted by Swiss craftsmen, ventilation systems built into the design. Each piece cost more than most people's cars. He traveled with 6 identical ones. If one failed during filming, production stopped. RKO Studios built special rigging for his ceiling dance and royal wedding, but the real concern wasn't gravity. It was the hairpiece. They conducted separate tests just for the toupee. Engineers calculated G-forces. Adhesive specialists were consulted. The hairpiece had to survive being literally upside down while dancing. Ginger Rogers knew the secret. She had to. During their romantic scenes, she was instructed never to run her fingers through his hair. One wrong move could destroy the illusion. She later said it was harder than learning the dance steps. Every embrace was choreographed to protect the hairpiece. The makeup department developed a rating system. Green days meant the hairpiece was secure. Yellow meant caution. Red meant no dancing until it was fixed. Astaire would check the daily rating before each scene. His entire performance depended on that color code. Rehearsals revealed the truth. Without the cameras rolling, Astaire would sometimes remove the hairpiece to cool down. Crew members were sworn to secrecy. No photographs, no gossip. Breaking the rule meant permanent blacklisting from Hollywood. The athletic demands of his dancing accelerated his hair loss. The constant sweating, the hot lights, the stress. By Top Hat in 1935, he was completely dependent on hairpieces. But watch the film. You'll never notice. Every spin, every leap, every tap, the hairpiece never moved. That was the real magic. His perfectionism extended to hairpiece maintenance. He kept detailed notes. Which adhesive worked best? Which pieces photographed better? How lighting affected appearance? It was scientific method applied to male vanity. Other actors borrowed his techniques. By the 1970s, when Astaire was in his 70s, the hairpieces had become less convincing, but his reputation was untouchable. Critics praised his ageless appearance. They were being polite. Everyone could see the obvious toupee, but admitting it would mean admitting decades of deception. The Little Giant's Missing Locks. Edward G. Robinson created the template for every screen gangster. That snarling voice, those menacing eyes, the psychological intimidation that made him seem 10 feet tall. Robinson was actually 5'5", and by his 40s, he was also completely bald. Warner Brothers faced a crisis. Their biggest tough guy was neither tough nor particularly hairy. The solution came from the makeup department. They created hairpieces that added visual height, strategic styling that drew the eye upward. It was architectural design applied to male pattern baldness. Robinson's approach was pragmatic. He called the hairpiece occupational equipment, like a gun for a cop or a stethoscope for a doctor. It was just another tool required for his job. This matter-of-fact attitude helped him cope with the daily deception. During Little Caesar, the film that made him a star, Robinson was already wearing partial hairpieces. By the time he made Key Largo with Humphrey Bogart in 1948, he needed full coverage. The tropical humidity of the Florida location nearly destroyed the illusion. Multiple pieces had to be flown in as backups. His gangster roles benefited from the hairpiece paranoia. That nervous energy you see in his performances, part of it was real. He was constantly aware of the hairpiece, checking it subtly, adjusting his movements to keep it secure. It added an underlying tension that enhanced his characters. The studio publicity department worked overtime. They airbrushed every photo, controlled every interview angle, created elaborate lies about his hair care routine. One publicist later admitted they spent more time managing Robinson's hairpiece than promoting his actual films. Robinson's wives knew, his children knew, his accountant definitely knew. The hairpieces were a significant expense, but publicly, everyone maintained the fiction. Even his obituaries in 1973 didn't mention it. The secret followed him to the grave. The Spartacus of Hidden Scalps. Kirk Douglas had the chin, the voice, the intensity that defined Hollywood masculinity. He also had a scalp that started showing through in his 30s. By the time he made Spartacus in 1960, Douglas was wearing partial hairpieces for every role. The gladiator epic created unique challenges: fight scenes in the rain, wrestling matches in mud, wind machines for battle sequences. Each threatened to expose the truth. The solution was multiple hairpieces of varying security levels, light pieces for dialogue, reinforced ones for action, emergency backups for disasters. Stanley Kubrick, directing Spartacus, was obsessed with authenticity, except when it came to Douglas's hair. That fiction had to be maintained at all costs. Kubrick personally supervised the hairpiece continuity. He had assistants whose only job was watching for hairpiece problems during takes. The famous "I am Spartacus" scene required 17 takes, not for performance. For hairpiece angle, the emotional intensity of Douglas's delivery would shift the piece slightly. Kubrick wanted perfection. The hairpiece had to remain still while Douglas's face contorted with emotion. Burt Lancaster knew Douglas's secret. They'd worked together multiple times. Lancaster, who had his own hairpiece issues, would joke with Douglas between takes. They called it the Carpet Club. Only members understood the daily struggle of maintaining the illusion. Douglas was strategic about his hairpiece evolution. Unlike stars who kept the same style for decades, he allowed his artificial hair to age naturally. It thinned gradually, receded slowly. By the 1970s, his hairpiece looked age-appropriate. The gradual change prevented jarring discontinuity. The Waterfront's Bare Truth. Marlon Brando revolutionized acting, method acting, raw emotion, authentic performance. Everything about him was real, except his hairline. By the time he filmed On the Waterfront in 1954, Brando was already using hairpieces for certain scenes. The irony was overwhelming. The actor who represented truth in performance was lying about his hair. But Brando saw it differently. The hairpiece was just another costume element. Like gaining weight for a role or changing his voice, it was all part of the transformation. Elia Kazan, who directed Brando in multiple films, had to manage the hairpiece situation delicately. Brando was sensitive about it, not from vanity, but from artistic principle. He felt the hairpiece discussion distracted from the work. Kazan agreed. They never discussed it publicly. During Streetcar Named Desire, Brando's natural hair was still mostly intact, but by The Wild One, hairpieces were being used for specific shots. The studio kept this secret locked down tighter than nuclear codes. Brando's image as the rebellious youth depended on that hair looking real. The Godfather transformation included more than aging makeup. The older Don Corleone needed a hairpiece that looked like an old man's real hair. Not too perfect, not too full. It had to seem natural for a man that age. The makeup team spent weeks getting it right. Apocalypse Now pushed everything to the limit. The jungle humidity, the river scenes, the physical demands. Brando's hairpiece situation became part of his difficult reputation on set. Coppola had to shoot around hairpiece problems. Some days, Brando refused to wear it at all. The comedic cover-up. Bob Hope entertained troops, hosted Oscar ceremonies, made millions laugh for 7 decades. He also wore a hairpiece for most of his career. The ski slope nose was real. The hair was Hollywood magic. Hope was practical about his hairpiece. During USO shows, he'd sometimes adjust it deliberately for laughs, but only in military shows, never on television, never in films. The public Bob Hope had perfect hair. The private Bob Hope had perfect timing about when to reveal the truth. His writers knew. They'd craft jokes that skirted the edge without crossing it, references to keeping your head together or top secret information, inside jokes that worked on 2 levels. The audience laughed without knowing why Hope found them extra funny. Bing Crosby, his frequent co-star, would needle Hope about the hairpiece between takes, but on camera they maintained the illusion. The road pictures required careful choreography. Not just for the comedy, but for the hairpiece security. Those physical gags could have exposed everything. The Dean Martin celebrity roast pushed boundaries. Comics would make coded references to Hope's coverage or his top priorities. Hope would smile, knowing they were dancing around the truth. It was a game everyone played, but no one acknowledged. The Scarface Secret. Paul Muni commanded the screen in the 1930s. His Scarface defined the gangster genre. But by the time he was making these iconic films, Muni was already dealing with significant hair loss. The studio solution was revolutionary for its time. They created multiple hairpieces for different emotional states, an aggressive hairpiece for tough guy scenes, a softer one for romantic moments, a disheveled one for desperation. Muni's hair acted along with him. It was method acting for toupees. The makeup artists who worked with Muni developed techniques still used today. They discovered that slightly imperfect hairpieces looked more realistic on camera. Too perfect, and it looked fake. They deliberately add flaws. A few strands out of place, slight asymmetry, controlled imperfection. Howard Hawks, who directed Scarface, later admitted the hairpiece situation added complexity to filming. Every shot had to be evaluated for hairpiece visibility. Some angles were forbidden. Some lighting setups impossible. The hairpiece dictated the visual language of the film. The Bogart Deception. Humphrey Bogart's hairpiece journey started earlier than most realize. By Casablanca in 1942, he was already using partial pieces. By The African Queen in 1951, full coverage was required. The transformation was so gradual, audiences never noticed. Lauren Bacall protected his secret throughout their marriage. She never mentioned it in interviews. Her autobiography carefully avoided the topic. Even decades after his death, she maintained the fiction. That was love in Hollywood, protecting the illusion even after death. The Maltese Falcon required specific hairpiece techniques. The film noir lighting that made the movie iconic also threatened to expose the hairpiece edges. Cinematographer Arthur Edison developed special techniques. Low angles that obscured the hairline. Strategic shadows. It was visual poetry designed to hide baldness. John Huston knew about Bogart's hairpiece but never let it affect casting. He believed Bogart's talent transcended physical appearance. The hairpiece was just a technical problem to solve. Like focus or framing, part of the craft, but not the art. The cigarette smoke that defined Bogart's image served another purpose. It created a haze that softened harsh lighting. The smoke helped obscure any hairpiece imperfections. Even his signature smoking was part of the deception. Each film required new hairpiece strategies as Bogart aged. The pieces had to evolve naturally. Too sudden a change would expose the secret. The continuity between films was managed as carefully as any plot point. The big sleep filming created hairpiece emergencies. The complex plot wasn't the only thing that didn't make sense. Some scenes show obvious hairpiece discontinuities, different takes, different pieces. But the film was so complicated, no one noticed the hair problems. His final film, The Harder They Fall, showed a man dying of cancer. The hairpiece work became increasingly difficult. But even then, facing death, Bogart insisted on maintaining the illusion. The show had to go on, even if the hair didn't pop. Studios invested millions in maintaining these deceptions. Publicity departments threatened journalists. Photographers signed contracts. Entire careers depended on keeping these secrets, and it worked. For decades, millions of fans never knew their heroes were bald. The technology evolved, from crude wigs to space-age adhesives, from obvious toupees to undetectable hair systems. Each generation of stars benefited from better deception, but the need for the lie remained constant. What does this mean for every classic film you've ever loved? Were you watching actors or illusions? Did you fall for performances or hairpieces? The camera lies. It always has. These men built careers on talent, certainly, but also on elaborate, expensive, carefully maintained fiction. Today's actors have transplants, chemical treatments, options these stars could only dream about. But something was lost, the collective agreement to maintain the illusion, the shared secret between Hollywood and its audience. We all knew. We all pretended not to know. The real performance wasn't on screen. It was the daily maintenance of an impossible fiction. Every morning, these men looked in mirrors and saw the truth. Then they covered it up and became the lies we loved. That took its own kind of courage. Perhaps the hair wasn't the point. Perhaps it never was. Some Hollywood stars weren't just heavy drinkers. They were so drunk they had to be carried onto set. Others slurred their lines, forgot entire movies they starred in, or even died with a drink in their hand. This is the dark side of fame, the actors who were completely wasted at all times. John Barrymore. He wasn't just a star. He was Hollywood's first great alcoholic. Long before rehab was an option, he drank himself into a joke. Studios covered for him at first, but by the end, even they couldn't save him. In the 1920s, Barrymore was on top of the world. He had the looks, the voice, and the talent. But off-camera, he was rarely sober. His drinking got so bad that directors had to feed him lines off-camera because he couldn't remember them. Some days, he couldn't even stand up straight and had to be held up by crew members just to finish a scene. Everyone in Hollywood knew he had a problem. He showed up drunk, stayed drunk, and somehow still got roles, at first. But things fell apart quickly. One night during a live performance, he completely blanked out. Instead of trying to recover, he turned to the audience and slurred, "Line, please?" The show was shut down early, and from then on, everyone knew Barrymore wasn't the same actor anymore. By the 1930s, his drinking wrecked his career. Studios didn't want to risk hiring him, and directors stopped covering for him. Even when friends tried to help, he kept drinking. His body started shutting down, shaking hands, failing memory, and a career in free fall. It wasn't just his career that crumbled. His personal life was a mess. He burned through marriages, lost his fortune, and ruined friendships. He was once considered one of the greatest actors of his time, but by the end he was a cautionary tale. The final years? A disaster. He was broke, sick, and barely able to work. Friends had to help pay his bills, but nothing could stop him from drinking himself to death. And if you think Hollywood let him rest in peace, think again. His so-called friends stole his corpse as a prank, dragging his lifeless body around for one last drunken joke. Barrymore was the blueprint for Hollywood self-destruction. He was the first major star to drink himself into oblivion, but he wouldn't be the last. W.C. Fields.
While most stars tried to hide their drinking, Fields didn't even bother. He carried a thermos full of gin everywhere, labeled with innocent words like pineapple juice or orange soda. Everyone knew what was inside, but no one dared to stop him. By the time he made it big in Hollywood, Fields was already a heavy drinker. He had spent years in vaudeville, performing night after night while nursing a constant buzz. Drinking was part of his personality, both on and off screen. He played lovable drunks in films, but behind the scenes he was far from charming when the alcohol took over. His drinking got so bad that directors had to shoot around his hangovers. Mornings were a lost cause. He was either too sick or still drunk. By afternoon, he'd start sipping from his juice thermos just to get through filming. Some days he was so hammered that he slurred entire scenes, forcing multiple retakes. Other times he skipped set entirely, leaving studios scrambling to explain his absence. Fields had a sharp wit, but when he drank, his temper flared. He'd curse out producers, insult his co-stars, and storm off set if something didn't go his way. His drinking wore down his body over time. His once sharp comedic timing started slipping, and so did his health. By the 1940s, his body was failing him. His liver was shot, and doctors warned him that if he didn't quit drinking, he wouldn't last much longer. But Fields didn't care. Instead of quitting, he had a liquor stash built into his hospital room. Nurses would find hidden bottles of whiskey under his mattress, and he'd sneak drinks when no one was looking. He drank until his final breath. When Fields died in 1946, people weren't surprised. His liver had given up long before he did. His career was legendary, but so was his drinking. And unlike other stars, he never tried to pretend otherwise. W.C. Fields wasn't just drunk all the time, he made sure everyone knew it. Errol Flynn. He was the ultimate movie hero, dashing, fearless, and always up for an adventure. But off-screen, he was a reckless alcoholic who drank so much that even Hollywood couldn't keep up with him. If there was a bottle around, Flynn was already ahead of the game. Flynn's drinking wasn't just a bad habit, it was his lifestyle. He'd start his day with champagne, switch to hard liquor by lunch, and keep going until he passed out. Studios tried to hide it, but his drinking made productions a nightmare. He slurred his lines, stumbled through action scenes, and sometimes needed to be propped up just to finish filming. During The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938, he was so drunk during fight scenes that stunt doubles had to take over more than usual. In They Died with Their Boots On, 1941, he kept falling off his horse because he couldn't stay balanced. Directors grew frustrated, but Flynn's star power kept him employed, at least for a while. His drinking wasn't just for fun. Flynn was self-medicating, drowning out personal demons with endless bottles of rum and whiskey. He was constantly in legal trouble, facing accusations of assault and scandalous affairs. His court cases became just as famous as his movies, but instead of slowing down, he drank even harder. By the 1950s, Hollywood had enough. Studios stopped covering for him, and his reputation crashed. His once chiseled looks were puffed and bloated from years of heavy drinking. His liver was failing, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. In 1959, Flynn's body finally gave up. At just 50 years old, he died of a massive heart attack, but doctors found his organs were destroyed from years of alcohol abuse. His liver was so damaged that they said it looked like he belonged to an 80-year-old man. Flynn was Hollywood's original bad boy, but his addiction was his downfall. He lived fast, drank hard, and never made it to old age. If Hollywood was a party, Flynn drank until the lights went out. Richard Burton. He was a functioning alcoholic who drank his way through nearly every movie he made. Unlike others who tried to hide it, Burton showed up wasted on set and still delivered Oscar-worthy performances. But behind the scenes, his addiction controlled everything. Burton's drinking started early. By his 20s, he was already downing multiple bottles of liquor a day. Success only made it worse. He became one of Hollywood's highest-paid actors, but with that fame came an endless supply of booze. During Cleopatra, 1963, where he met Elizabeth Taylor, he was drunk in nearly every scene. The two fueled each other's addictions, turning their romance into a storm of booze, fights, and makeups. His drinking was legendary. He once chugged 3 bottles of vodka before noon, then went straight to filming like nothing happened. Some directors learned to work around it, shooting scenes early in the day before he got too drunk. Others just gave up, letting Burton slur his way through takes. By the 1970s, his addiction took its toll. His once powerful voice turned hoarse, his sharp looks faded, and his body started breaking down. He tried quitting. Doctors warned him he was drinking himself to death, but every attempt ended the same way: back at the bar. Burton died in 1984 at just 58 years old. His liver was completely shot, and his body was wrecked from decades of drinking. He left behind a legacy of brilliant performances, but also a reputation as one of Hollywood's most tragic drunks. Unlike others who drank themselves out of a career, Burton somehow kept going, but his addiction won in the end. Peter O'Toole. He was a Hollywood legend, but he was also rarely sober. He built a career on charm, wit, and raw talent, while drinking so much that he sometimes couldn't remember filming entire movies. O'Toole's drinking started early. By the time he became famous in Lawrence of Arabia, 1962, he was already drinking more than his body could handle. He was known to down multiple bottles of whiskey in a single night, then show up to set the next morning like nothing happened, until it started affecting his work. His reputation as a drunken genius followed him everywhere. He would slur through scenes, forget his lines, or suddenly fall asleep in the middle of filming. On Goodbye, Mr. Chips, 1969, production shut down multiple times because he was too wasted to work. In interviews, he later admitted, "I have no memory of making some films." His drinking wasn't just a problem for Hollywood. It nearly killed him. In the 1970s, doctors found that years of alcohol abuse had destroyed his stomach lining, leading to internal bleeding and emergency surgery. They told him if he didn't stop drinking, he wouldn't survive. O'Toole tried to quit, but never fully gave it up. He continued acting, but his wild behavior and heavy drinking kept him from reaching his full potential. Even later in life, when he claimed to be sober, people doubted it. His reputation was too legendary. He lived longer than most Hollywood drunks, making it to 81, but his body was wrecked from decades of drinking. When he died in 2013, fans remembered him as a brilliant actor, but also one of Hollywood's most infamous alcoholics. Peter O'Toole didn't just drink, he turned it into an art form. Oliver Reed. His reputation for out-drinking entire bars made him a legend, but it also destroyed his career and eventually his life. Reed's drinking was on another level. He didn't just sip whiskey between takes, he chugged entire bottles. He once challenged 5 Royal Navy sailors to a drinking contest and won, downing over 100 pints of beer in a single session. By the end, he had to be carried out unconscious. On set, he was a nightmare and a spectacle. Directors never knew if they were getting a world-class actor or a slurring disaster. During The Three Musketeers, 1973, he showed up so drunk that he could barely stand. He got through the scenes, but barely. By the 1980s, his drinking had wrecked his reputation. Studios didn't want the risk, and his career spiraled downward. But the real tragedy came during Gladiator, 2000. Reed had been given one last shot at a big role playing Proximo, but instead of staying focused, he went on one final drinking spree. While filming in Malta, he downed 8 pints of beer, 12 shots of rum, half a bottle of whiskey, and a few doubles of cognac, all in one sitting. That night, he collapsed and died of a massive heart attack. His death was so sudden that the film had to use CGI to finish his scenes. Reed had drunk himself to his own tragic ending. Oliver Reed's drinking wasn't just a problem, it was his identity. He outlived many of Hollywood's legendary drunks, but in the end, alcohol still won. Mickey Rourke. He had everything: looks, talent, and a rising career. But instead of building on it, he drank, fought, and burned every bridge in Hollywood. His downfall wasn't just alcohol, but it played a massive role in his destruction. In the 1980s, Rourke was unstoppable. Movies like 9.5 Weeks and Angel Heart made him one of Hollywood's most in-demand actors. But behind the scenes, he was drinking heavily, getting into bar fights, and making himself unhireable. Directors hated working with him because he was either too drunk to perform or too aggressive to control. His drinking wasn't just a problem on set, it ruined his personal life. He trashed relationships, got arrested multiple times, and became known as Hollywood's biggest liability. Instead of cleaning up, he walked away from acting and became a professional boxer, a move that only made things worse. Boxing destroyed his face, but he still drank through the pain. By the late 90s, he was broke, washed up, and completely forgotten by Hollywood. Even he admitted, "I was drinking myself to death." He lost roles, lost friends, and almost lost his life. But somehow, Rourke pulled off a comeback. He got sober, repaired some of the damage, and landed The Wrestler, 2008, a film that mirrored his own self-destructive past. It earned him an Oscar nomination, but even with success, he struggled to stay clean. Mickey Rourke should have been one of Hollywood's greatest legends. Instead, alcohol and bad choices turned him into a cautionary tale. Even today, he's a reminder of how fast Hollywood can chew you up if you let it. Dennis Hopper. He was Hollywood's ultimate wild card. For decades, he was either too drunk, too high, or too unhinged to function. Somehow, he still delivered legendary performances, even when he could barely stand upright. Hopper's drinking started early, but by the time he became famous in Easy Rider, 1969, it was out of control. He drank on set, between takes, and sometimes during filming. He was so wasted while directing the last movie, 1971, that the film became an incoherent disaster, and Hollywood blacklisted him for nearly a decade. During Apocalypse Now, 1979, Hopper was so drunk and coked out that he couldn't remember his lines. Director Francis Ford Coppola had to feed him one sentence at a time because giving him a full script was pointless. Somehow, his manic energy worked for the role, but off-screen, he was a walking train wreck. Hopper's reputation was legendary, but his career kept crashing and burning. He spent most of the 80s either too wasted to work or banned from Hollywood entirely. At his lowest, he lived in the desert, talking to himself and drinking until he hallucinated. He later admitted he was drinking 28 beers, a bottle of whiskey, and doing 3 grams of cocaine every day. Then, out of nowhere, he got sober. In 1986, he made an insane comeback with Blue Velvet, playing one of the most terrifying villains in film history. This time, the madness was acting, not alcohol. Dennis Hopper drank his way through decades of Hollywood, burning bridges and ruining opportunities. But unlike most stars on this list, he actually cleaned up and made it back. His career should have been over, but somehow he outlived his own chaos. Christopher Hitchens. He was Hollywood adjacent, a constant presence in interviews, debates, and film discussions, always with a drink in hand. Unlike most people on this list, he didn't try to hide it. In fact, he embraced his alcoholism and made it part of his public persona. Hitchens drank like it was his job. Mornings started with scotch or wine, and by afternoon he'd moved on to whiskey, vodka, or whatever was available. He once admitted that he was never fully sober past lunchtime. His friends, colleagues, and even his enemies knew that if you were meeting Hitchens, you were meeting Hitchens and his drink. Despite being constantly buzzed, he was brilliant. His ability to debate, write, and command attention never seemed to suffer, at least on the surface. He could drink glass after glass of whiskey, then go on live TV and verbally dismantle his opponents. His mind was razor sharp, even when his liver wasn't. But make no mistake, his drinking had consequences. Friends noticed his once strong voice becoming raspier, his famous wit sometimes losing its edge. He started to look tired, worn down. Years of chain smoking and drinking finally caught up to him. In 2010, he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, the kind that heavy drinking and smoking practically guarantee. Doctors told him to quit, but he didn't see the point. He once joked that if he had his life to live over again, he would drink more, not less. Even as his body failed him, Hitchens kept writing, debating, and of course, drinking. He saw no reason to stop. It was who he was. In 2011, at 62 years old, he passed away, leaving behind a legacy of brilliant writing, sharp debates, and a lifetime of liquor-fueled intellect. Unlike Hollywood stars who drank themselves into oblivion, Hitchens never spiraled out of control, but his addiction still killed him. He was proof that even the smartest minds aren't invincible when alcohol is in the mix. Nicolas Cage. Unlike the other names on this list, he is still standing, but his reputation as Hollywood's modern-day wildcard has been fueled by years of alcohol, erratic behavior, and bizarre public meltdowns. If old-school stars drank their way into oblivion, Nicolas Cage has drunk his way into internet legend. Cage wasn't always Hollywood's unhinged meme king. In the 90s and early 2000s, he was an A-list actor with an Oscar, blockbuster hits, and critical respect. But behind the scenes, his drinking was getting out of control. Directors noticed his slurred speech, co-stars saw his erratic moods, and soon his performances started getting weirder and more unpredictable. Then, the public meltdowns started. In 2011, Cage was arrested in New Orleans for public drunkenness and disturbing the peace, after getting into a shouting match with his wife. Reports claimed he was stumbling, screaming, and too wasted to control himself. A few years later, he was caught drunkenly singing Prince's Purple Rain at a karaoke bar, so hammered that he could barely stand. The drinking wasn't just a personal issue. It wrecked his finances, too. Cage went on a spending spree fueled by booze and bad decisions, blowing through $150 million on castles, private islands, a dinosaur skull, and a pet octopus. When the IRS came knocking, he had to take every role he could get, leading to the infamous era of low-budget, straight-to-DVD Cage movies. Despite the chaos, Cage never fully collapsed like the drunks of old Hollywood. Somehow, he kept delivering performances, sometimes brilliant, sometimes downright unhinged. His 2018 film Mandy reminded people why he was a star in the first place, and in 2021, Pig earned him some of the best reviews of his career. Unlike Barrymore, Flynn, or Reed, Cage hasn't drunk himself into an early grave. Yet. But his booze-fueled antics, erratic career, and bizarre public breakdowns make him the closest thing modern Hollywood has to an old-school drunken disaster. Whether he crashes completely or somehow reinvents himself again, one thing is certain: Nicolas Cage is never boring. They were praised, paid, and plastered on every billboard. But off-camera, they were drowning in vodka, in pressure, in pain. No one dared to stop. This is what it looked like when the fame didn't fix anything. Buster Keaton's silent struggles. He was one of the biggest stars of the silent film era, stone-faced, brilliant, a master of physical comedy. But once sound came in, everything started falling apart, including him. In 1928, he signed with MGM. That deal killed his freedom. Studios now controlled his scripts, his stunts, and eventually his drinking. He didn't take it well. At first, it was casual, just a few drinks after work. Then it turned into drinking on set. Then it never stopped. By 1930, Buster was showing up hungover, forgetting lines, and walking through scenes like a ghost. Directors had to cut around him. His timing, once perfect, was gone. He started drinking whiskey in his dressing room between takes. Some days, he didn't know where he was. Others, he just didn't care. He tried to hide it, but people noticed. His wife left him in 1932. He lost access to his kids. He went on drinking binges that lasted days. At one point, MGM assigned a full-time assistant just to keep him from falling apart mid-scene. Things hit rock bottom in 1934. Buster was found wandering the street, drunk and confused. He was committed to a sanitarium for exhaustion, but it was really to dry out. He escaped in a straitjacket, literally, climbed out a window and vanished. For the next few years, he was broke and out of work. He took whatever roles he could, often uncredited or in low-budget shorts. He kept drinking. His friends said he was lost, but they didn't know how to help. Rehab wasn't really a thing back then. You either pulled yourself together or you disappeared. In the early 1940s, something changed. He met a woman named Eleanor Norris. She was 20 years younger and didn't drink. Somehow, she helped him stop. Slowly, Buster came back. He started writing again, got some TV gigs, even returned to MGM as a gag writer. He never drank like that again. Tallulah Bankhead's Martini Mornings. She wasn't quiet about anything, not her politics, not her lovers, and definitely not her drinking. She drank like it was her job. Breakfast started with a martini. Lunch included more. By dinner, no one could count. She grew up wealthy and wild, raised in Alabama high society. By her 20s, she was already famous on Broadway. Hollywood came calling in the 1930s, but she didn't care much for rules. Studios asked her to tone it down. She didn't. Tallulah lit cigarettes during takes, refused to stick to the script, and drank openly on set. One producer said directing her was like trying to hold water in a net. She laughed it off. She always did. If someone mentioned the hangovers, she said, "Don't be silly. I never get hangovers. I get applause." She could be brilliant when she was focused. In The Little Foxes on Stage, she played the lead role to rave reviews. But one night, she collapsed halfway through the performance. A stagehand said she'd downed 2 martinis and half a flask before curtain. The audience waited, curtain stayed closed, and Tallulah was carried out the back door. She didn't hide it. In fact, she leaned into it. On talk shows, she sipped whiskey and answered questions with slurred charm. Reporters wrote about her fabulous wreckage. She loved the drama. She called herself the world's most fabulous drunk. But it wasn't always funny. Friends said she'd disappear for days. Some weekends ended in hospitals. One doctor warned her she was drinking herself sick. She shrugged and lit another cigarette. By the 1950s, her film roles were drying up. Her voice was gravel. Her timing was off. Directors stopped calling. She stayed famous mostly for being Tallulah, loud, drunk, and outrageous. She never fully stopped drinking. Even in her later years, she was still sipping bourbon before interviews and talking circles around younger actors. But her body gave out. Liver issues, lung problems, weight loss. She died in 1968 at age 66, alone in her apartment. The cause? Pneumonia, worsened by years of heavy drinking and smoking. Billie Holiday's Booze and Blues. She had one of the most haunting voices in music history. But off stage, she fought a constant war with racism, heartbreak, and a bottle that never left her side. She started drinking young, working in nightclubs where liquor flowed like water. By the late 1930s, she was a star. Her voice could stop a room. Songs like Strange Fruit hit hard. But backstage, Billie drank to calm her nerves before shows. It started with gin, then brandy, then anything she could get her hands on. In the early 1940s, her fame exploded. So did her addiction. She was drinking before sets, between songs, and after every show. Friends said she was never fully sober. Club owners noticed too. Some nights, she forgot lyrics. Other nights, she couldn't stand. She was arrested for possession in 1947, but alcohol was always the quieter demon. Her cabaret card was revoked in New York, which meant she couldn't perform in any venue that served alcohol. That wiped out most of her income. Still, she drank. In hotel rooms, she'd sneak liquor into orange juice bottles. On the road, she hid flasks in makeup bags. Her manager tried cutting her off. She fired him. Her voice, though strained, still pulled crowds. But her memory started slipping, her temper got worse, and her drinking kept going. By 1956, she wrote a memoir. Parts of it were censored. The rest told the story of a woman in pain. In interviews, she brushed off the drinking. "I drink because I need to forget," she once said. "Some people pray. I pour." The final years were brutal. She was often broke, blacklisted, and barely functioning. In 1959, she collapsed in her New York apartment. At the hospital, they found cirrhosis, kidney failure, and fluid in her lungs. She was 44. The police showed up while she was still in bed and arrested her again for drug possession. They even posted a guard at her door. She died days later with just 70 cents in her bank account. Her voice lives on, but Billie never made peace with the bottle. The music soared. She didn't. Robert Walker's vodka breakdown. He had the charm, the looks, and a rising career in the 1940s. He also had vodka in his trailer, vodka in his coffee, and vodka in his veins. By the time he gave his most iconic performance, he was already falling apart. His big break came in Since You Went Away, 1944, where he starred opposite his real-life ex-wife, Jennifer Jones. It wasn't just awkward, but it was brutal. The divorce had crushed him, and he started drinking more to cope. Crew members said he shook between takes and sometimes needed help walking to set. The booze made him unpredictable. One day he was polite and professional. The next, he'd explode over nothing. He fought with directors, slurred his lines, threw furniture. MGM tried to protect him, but he was becoming a liability. In 1948, he had a breakdown on set and was admitted to the Menninger Clinic, a psychiatric hospital. The official reason was emotional exhaustion. The real reason was that he was drinking himself sick. Doctors put him on sedatives to calm his nerves. He promised to quit. He didn't. He made a short comeback in 1951 with Strangers on a Train. It was his best role, chilling, sharp, unforgettable. He played a charming psychopath. The scary part? He didn't need to stretch. Friends said he barely had to act. Alfred Hitchcock kept the camera rolling even when Walker went off script. But behind the scenes, things were still bad. He was mixing alcohol with barbiturates. He didn't sleep. He stopped eating. Some nights he called friends sobbing, convinced his life was over. In August 1951, a doctor came to his home to sedate him during one of his episodes. He was given amobarbital to calm down. He never woke up. Officially, it was an accidental reaction. Unofficially, it was alcohol, stress, and too many pills in a body that couldn't take it anymore. Robert Walker was just 32. He had 2 sons, a hit film in theaters, and a reputation that Hollywood couldn't figure out. One reviewer called him a star who burned too fast and left nothing behind but questions. The only thing more tragic than his performance was how close it was to the real thing, Diana Barrymore's broken dynasty. She was born into fame. Her father was John Barrymore, a legendary actor and legendary drunk. She got both of those traits. At first, it looked like she'd make it big. In the early 1940s, Universal Studios signed her with headlines calling her the next big Barrymore. She had the name, the face, and enough talent to turn heads. But behind it, she was already drinking hard, just like her father. She started missing rehearsals. Sometimes she'd show up so hungover production had to cancel. On stage, she slurred lines. Off stage, she collapsed in dressing rooms. One night, during a performance of Romantic Mr. Dickens, she walked off mid-scene and never returned. No explanation. Just left. By 1944, her career had stalled. Universal quietly dropped her. She married a few times, but each relationship fell apart, usually under the weight of booze and shouting matches. One ex-husband said living with her was like riding a train with no brakes. She tried Broadway again, but the drinking got in the way. Crew members hid liquor bottles backstage just to keep her sober during shows. It didn't work. Critics noticed. One review said she looked tired before she even opened her mouth. In 1957, she published a memoir called Too Much, Too Soon. It told everything: the drinking, the blackouts, the hospital stays, the suicide attempts, the family name that opened every door and then crushed her once she walked through. It sold well, but nothing changed. That same year, Warner Brothers adapted her memoir into a film. She didn't star in it. She didn't even consult. While the movie played in theaters, Diana was living in a rundown apartment, broke and drinking again. In 1960, her housekeeper found her in bed, surrounded by pills and empty bottles. The autopsy listed natural causes, but doctors said it was years of alcohol and sedatives. She was 38. She once said, "Everyone expects me to be a Barrymore, but I don't know what that means anymore." She wanted to live up to the name. Instead, it buried her. Truman Capote's talk show spirals. He wrote one of the greatest true crime books ever printed. In Cold Blood made him a literary star. But by the 1970s, most people didn't see him as a writer. They saw him as a drunk guest on late-night TV. Capote was always eccentric. But once fame hit hard, so did the partying. He was a regular at Studio 54, known for sipping chilled vodka out of tiny crystal glasses and slurring insults at whoever got too close. He called it research. Friends called it a meltdown. He didn't hide it. On the Dick Cavett Show, he showed up visibly drunk and rambled through his answers. On The Tonight Show, he flirted with Johnny Carson, made fun of other guests, and then forgot where he was. It became a pattern. Invite Truman, expect a mess. Publishers started pulling back. One editor said his writing got sloppy and mean. He had promised a massive novel called Answered Prayers, meant to be his masterpiece. But when excerpts came out, they didn't land. Critics called them petty and cruel. Friends stopped returning his calls. Capote responded the only way he knew how. He drank more. By the early 80s, things had gotten grim. He bounced between friends' guest rooms and upscale rehab centers. He didn't last long in either. Sometimes he was funny and charming. Other times he screamed at nurses and trashed hotel rooms. One friend found him in a robe on the floor, drinking out of a vase. In 1984, he moved into the home of Joanne Carson, Johnny Carson's ex-wife. She tried to help him dry out. It didn't work. On August 25th, he died in her guest room from liver failure, complicated by drug and alcohol use. He was 59. He used to say he wanted to be remembered for his words. In the end, it was the slurred ones people remembered most. Sam Peckinpah's Bloody Cocktails. He made violent, brilliant films. He also made enemies on set, passed out in editing rooms, and drank like the credits depended on it. In the 1960s, he directed The Wild Bunch, a western so bloody and stylish it changed the genre. But behind the camera, Sam was already deep into drinking. He kept vodka in a water bottle and whiskey in his coat. Cast and crew said he would sip through takes, bark orders mid-slur, and forget what scene they were filming. At first, producers tolerated it. His films made money and his chaos sometimes added edge, but by the 1970s, he was spiraling. On Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, 1973, he fought with the studio, missed deadlines, and drank from morning to night. Crew members found him asleep in the editing room, drooling on reels. He didn't deny it. In interviews, he joked that bourbon was his assistant director. When critics asked why his films were so violent, he said, "I'm just showing what's real." The truth was, he was barely hanging on. Studios started to panic. They began assigning shadow editors to finish his films behind his back. His name still appeared on the credits, but much of the work was done without him. He lashed out, but the studios held the power and the checkbook. By the early 1980s, he was taking whatever work he could get. He directed a few music videos. One was for Julian Lennon. Between takes, he drank alone in his trailer, coughing and shaking. His hands were too unsteady to hold a camera. He gave orders from a folding chair. Sam Peckinpah died in 1984 from heart failure. Doctors pointed to years of alcohol abuse as a major cause. Edward Furlong's fast fall. He was just 14 when he landed Terminator 2. Overnight, he became one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. But as fast as the fame came, the drinking followed. By the late 90s, Furlong's teen idol days were over, and he was drinking hard. It wasn't just beer at parties. Friends said he'd start the day with vodka and keep it going until he passed out. He still landed roles, American History X, Detroit Rock City, but directors had to work around his behavior. He'd show up late, forget lines, or vanish during breaks. The press caught on. In 2001, he was arrested for trying to free lobsters from a tank in a Kentucky grocery store, drunk, of course. The charges were dropped, but it made headlines. He laughed it off. Then he got arrested again and again. In 2004, he entered rehab. It didn't stick. Later that year, he was spotted staggering out of a club in Los Angeles, glassy-eyed and barely able to stand. Paparazzi caught the whole thing. He tried to stay out of sight, but the photos followed him everywhere. Then came the restraining orders. His ex-girlfriend accused him of violence while intoxicated. In 2010, he was banned from seeing his son after testing positive for alcohol. The court records show a pattern: relapse, arrest, rehab, repeat. Studios stopped calling. He lost the role in Terminator 3. By 2013, he was facing jail time and showed up in court looking pale, bloated, and exhausted. The judge ordered another rehab stint, his fifth. In 2019, he claimed to be sober and was briefly brought back for Terminator. Dark fate, though his appearance was limited to digital footage. He said it felt like a second chance. Whether it stuck is unclear. Mischa Barton's vodka fog. In the early 2000s, she was everywhere. After the OC launched her to fame, she became a fashion icon, a tabloid fixture, and a regular on red carpets. But behind the flashes and premieres, the drinking was building fast. She was only 17 when the show started. By 19, she was hitting LA clubs almost nightly. Paparazzi followed her from bar to bar. Photos showed her stumbling out of back doors, getting into cars barefoot, or clutching energy drinks that weren't just energy. Friends said vodka was her go-to. In 2007, it all caught up with her. On December 27th, she was pulled over in West Hollywood. She had no license, failed a sobriety test, and was charged with DUI. Officers found illegal substances and an open bottle of alcohol in the car. She was booked, photographed, and released the next morning. The story made national headlines. She entered rehab shortly after, claiming it was for exhaustion. But insiders said it was about more than that. Her behavior had become erratic. She stopped showing up for meetings, lost roles, burned bridges. Even her management team backed away. In 2009, things took a darker turn. Police were called to her LA home for a mental health check. She was placed on an involuntary psychiatric hold. Later, she said the incident was triggered by stress and medication, but alcohol was still in the picture. Over the next few years, she tried to rebuild, but the pattern didn't break. More nights out, more shaky interviews. On The Hill's New Beginnings in 2019, she opened up about how fame and pressure pushed her into unhealthy habits. She didn't name the substances, but the implication was clear. Barton said she wanted to stay sober, but her history was hard to ignore. For a long time, she wasn't an actress in control. She was a walking headline. The stardom came fast. The crash came faster. Mischa didn't just lose momentum. She got swallowed by the fog. Shia LaBeouf's unraveling on screen. He didn't just party. He unraveled in public. The arrests, meltdowns, and blackouts, alcohol was behind nearly all of it. After Transformers made him a global name, Shia drank hard behind the scenes. On the set of Lawless, 2012, he admitted he got drunk on real moonshine to get into character. "I didn't know any other way to do it," he said. Co-stars noticed. He was erratic, unpredictable, sometimes slurring before lunch. That same year, he was spotted at a London pub stumbling into fights and being escorted out. The footage made the rounds online. His team blamed stress. Fans blamed the bottle. In 2014, things got worse. At a performance of Cabaret in New York, he was arrested for smoking indoors, shouting at the cast, and slapping someone on the rear. He was reportedly drunk when police arrived and had to be fitted with a face mask at the station. The next day, he apologized. A week later, he was drinking again. More arrests followed. In 2015, police picked him up in Austin, Texas, after he ran through traffic screaming at strangers. Officers said he smelled like booze and couldn't stand still. He tried rehab, then relapsed. Over and over. In 2017, A viral video showed him cursing out officers during a drunken outburst in Savannah, Georgia. "You're going to hell, straight to hell," he said, slurring and red-eyed. It wasn't his first arrest that year, or his last. He later admitted he was drinking to deal with fear. "I didn't want to be an actor anymore," he said. "I wanted to disappear." Instead, he kept showing up in headlines, drunk, damaged, and out of control. Therapists diagnosed him with PTSD and complex trauma. Rehab helped briefly, then more court dates, more apologies. Even when sober, the damage lingered. Studios backed off, collaborators cut ties. In recent years, he's claimed sobriety, said he's working on himself, but the past is heavy. The footage, the police records, the slurred interviews, they're still out there. Shia once said he used alcohol to numb the noise. The problem was, it just made everything louder. Behind the red carpet lies a darker side of fame. Hollywood icons revered by millions, caught in the most jaw-dropping drunken scandals. From Errol Flynn's wild escapades to Robert Downey Jr.'s struggles, uncover the secrets the stars tried to hide. This is the real Hollywood. Errol Flynn's Wild Nights, 1940s. An iconic actor of the 1940s known for his swashbuckling roles in films like The Adventures of Robin Hood and Captain Blood, Errol Flynn was infamous for his off-screen antics. Flynn's penchant for heavy drinking and partying led to numerous scandals. One of the most notorious incidents occurred in 1942 when he was arrested for statutory rape involving two underage girls, Betty Hansen and Peggy Satterlee. Although he was acquitted, the trial brought his wild lifestyle into the spotlight. Flynn's behavior was a staple of Hollywood gossip columns. He was often seen at bars and nightclubs, drinking excessively and getting into brawls. His favorite haunts included the famed Trocadero on the Sunset Strip and the Macambo nightclub, where he would often be found in the company of fellow actors and high-profile socialites. Flynn's notorious parties at his Mulholland Drive estate, nicknamed Cirrhosis by the Sea, were legendary for their debauchery, attracting Hollywood's elite and often ending in chaos. His autobiography, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, detailed many of these exploits, cementing his reputation as one of Hollywood's original bad boys. The book provides a vivid account of his hedonistic lifestyle, including tales of drunken escapades and romantic entanglements. Flynn once reportedly quipped, "I like my whiskey old and my women young," a line that epitomized his carefree and often reckless approach to life. Despite his personal life, Flynn continued to have a successful career. He starred in several notable films during the 1940s, including They Died with Their Boots On and Gentleman Jim. Spencer Tracy's Struggles with Alcohol, 1950s. One of Hollywood's most respected actors, Spencer Tracy battled alcoholism for much of his life. Known for his roles in classics like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and Inherit the Wind, Tracy's drinking often affected his work. In the 1950s, his struggle became more apparent, with multiple incidents of public intoxication. One particularly notable event occurred in 1953 when Tracy was found passed out in the lobby of the Beverly Hills Hotel after a night of heavy drinking. His drinking affected his health and led to several hospitalizations. He often experienced severe hangovers and dehydration, requiring medical attention. Tracy's longtime companion, Katharine Hepburn, frequently stepped in to support him, even going so far as to monitor his drinking and assist him in his recovery efforts. Despite his struggles, Tracy's talent remained undeniable. He continued to deliver powerful performances in films such as Bad Day at Black Rock and The Old Man and the Sea. His ability to convey deep emotion and complexity in his characters made him a beloved figure in Hollywood. Directors admired his professionalism on set, even though they were aware of his battles with alcohol. Tracy's alcoholism strained his relationships with colleagues and affected his physical appearance. His once robust frame became increasingly frail, and his face showed the signs of heavy drinking. Yet his performances never wavered in their intensity and brilliance. Hepburn once said of Tracy, "He was a drunk, but he was my drunk," highlighting her unwavering support and love for him despite his addiction. His addiction also took a toll on his family life. Tracy was separated from his wife Louise, although they never divorced, largely due to his Catholic faith. His children, John and Susie, were deeply affected by his alcoholism and the instability it brought to their lives.
Judy Garland's troubled life, 1960s. The beloved star of The Wizard of Oz, Judy Garland had a tumultuous life marked by substance abuse. In the 1960s, her struggles with alcohol and prescription drugs became more pronounced. Garland's dependence on substances led to erratic behavior and numerous incidents of public intoxication. In 1964, Garland was found intoxicated and disoriented in a London hotel. She had to cancel several performances due to her condition. Her addiction issues were further exacerbated by the pressures of constant touring and financial difficulties. Despite attempts to rehabilitate her image, her addictions continued to plague her. Garland's manager, Stevie Phillips, described her as being so drunk she couldn't stand, highlighting the severity of her condition. Her substance abuse and deteriorating health made it difficult for her to secure stable work in the industry. Her once radiant voice and commanding stage presence were often overshadowed by her personal struggles. Nevertheless, Garland managed to deliver a few notable performances during this period, including a memorable concert at Carnegie Hall in 1961, which became a best-selling album and earned her a Grammy. Garland's relationships also suffered due to her addictions. She went through multiple marriages and divorces, each contributing to her emotional instability. Her children, including Liza Minnelli, often witnessed her struggles, adding a layer of familial tension to her already chaotic life. Garland's attempts at sobriety were frequent, but often short-lived, as the demands of her career and personal life repeatedly drove her back to substance use. Dean Martin's party persona, 1950s to 1970s. A member of the famous Rat Pack, Dean Martin was known for his smooth voice and charming on-screen presence. Off-screen, Martin cultivated a persona of the perpetual partygoer, often seen with a drink in hand. While some of his drinking was part of his act, Martin did have a penchant for alcohol. Throughout the 1950s to the 1970s, Martin's love for drinking was well documented. He often appeared on stage and television seemingly inebriated, playing into his laid-back, fun-loving image. His performances on The Dean Martin Show and the Dean Martin Celebrity Roasts featured him frequently sipping what appeared to be alcoholic beverages, adding to his carefree persona. This image was so convincing that many believed he was always under the influence, even though much of it was for show. Martin's association with the Rat Pack, alongside Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., and others, only solidified his reputation as a hard-drinking entertainer. Their performances in Las Vegas were legendary for their humor, music, and revelry, with Martin often playing the role of the amiable drunk. Despite his heavy drinking, Martin maintained a successful career in music, film, and television. He starred in a series of popular films, including Some Came Running and Rio Bravo, and recorded numerous hit songs like Everybody Loves Somebody and Ain't That a Kick in the Head. Behind the scenes, Martin's drinking did have its limits. His daughter, Dina Martin, once said, "He liked to drink, but he knew his limits," suggesting that his on-stage persona was partly an act. In reality, Martin was known to switch his whiskey glass for apple juice during performances to maintain his composure while still entertaining the crowd. Marlon Brando's off-screen drama, 1950s to 1970s. Celebrated for his roles in A Streetcar Named Desire and The Godfather, Marlon Brando was known for his unpredictable behavior and off-screen drama. In the 1950s, Brando's temperamental nature and disdain for Hollywood norms led to clashes with directors and producers. His personal life was equally chaotic, with numerous affairs and a penchant for excess. By the 1970s, Brando's behavior became even more erratic, with reports of heavy drinking and weight gain affecting his performances. Despite these issues, his talent kept him in demand, although his career was marked by these tumultuous periods. One of Brando's most infamous episodes occurred in 1953 during the filming of The Wild One. Known for his method acting, Brando immersed himself fully into the rebellious character he portrayed. Off-screen, he continued this behavior, frequently getting into altercations and showing up drunk on set. His clashes with director Laszlo Benedek and other crew members became legendary, further cementing his reputation as difficult but brilliant. In the 1960s, Brando's heavy drinking became more public. While filming Mutiny on the Bounty in Tahiti in 1962, his off-screen antics caused significant delays and budget overruns. He would often disappear for days, indulging in alcohol-fueled parties that disrupted the production. His unpredictable behavior led to frequent arguments with the film's director, Louis Milestone, and the studio, which struggled to keep the project on track. By the 1970s, Brando's erratic behavior and physical decline were evident. His performance in The Godfather was critically acclaimed, yet behind the scenes, his unpredictable actions and excessive drinking caused tension. His weight gain and lack of discipline were issues that directors had to navigate delicately. On the set of Last Tango in Paris, director Bernardo Bertolucci had to manage Brando's erratic schedule and moods, often exacerbated by his drinking. Elizabeth Taylor's tumultuous love life, 1950s to 1970s. Known for her roles in Cleopatra and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, Elizabeth Taylor was as famous for her tumultuous personal life as she was for her acting. Throughout the 1950s to the 1970s, Taylor's numerous marriages and publicized affairs made headlines. Her relationship with Richard Burton, fueled by passion and alcohol, was particularly notable. The two married and divorced twice, with their fiery relationship often playing out in the public eye. Taylor's struggles with substance abuse, including alcohol and prescription drugs, further complicated her personal life and career. One of the most infamous incidents highlighting Taylor's issues with alcohol occurred during the filming of Cleopatra in the early 1960s. Taylor and Burton's on-set affair, fueled by their heavy drinking, became a public scandal. The media frenzy surrounding their relationship overshadowed the film itself. Paparazzi frequently captured the couple leaving bars and nightclubs in a drunken stupor, fueling tabloid stories and public fascination with their tumultuous romance. Another notable episode happened in 1974 when Taylor and Burton were dining at the Dorchester Hotel in London. Both had been drinking heavily, and a heated argument ensued which quickly escalated into a loud and public confrontation. The incident ended with Taylor throwing a glass of wine in Burton's face. Such public displays of their volatile relationship, often exacerbated by alcohol, became a regular spectacle for the press, and further cemented their reputations as Hollywood's most tempestuous couple. Peter O'Toole's legendary drinking, 1960s. Peter O'Toole, known for his iconic role in Lawrence of Arabia, was famous for his heavy drinking throughout the 1960s. His off-screen escapades were as legendary as his performances. One night in 1963, O'Toole and fellow actor Richard Harris reportedly drank their way through several London pubs, ending in a drunken brawl that required police intervention. O'Toole himself recounted in an interview, "I did quite enjoy the taste of alcohol a lot, and there were nights when I would drink a bar dry." His drinking was so notorious that in one incident he was found passed out in a public fountain in Rome. This wild lifestyle often led to outrageous antics that became the stuff of Hollywood legend, like the time he supposedly rode a camel through the streets of Dublin after a night of heavy drinking. Despite his wild behavior, O'Toole's talent kept him in high demand. Directors and producers were willing to overlook his off-screen antics because of his exceptional acting abilities. He delivered powerful performances in films such as Beckett and The Lion in Winter, earning him critical acclaim and several Academy Award nominations. However, his drinking began to take a toll on his health and reputation. He was known to show up on set late or inebriated, causing frustration among his colleagues. O'Toole's drinking also led to numerous health issues. He underwent surgery in the late 1970s for pancreatitis, a condition exacerbated by his excessive alcohol consumption. His doctors warned him that he had to stop drinking if he wanted to live, which prompted him to significantly reduce his alcohol intake. Despite these challenges, O'Toole continued to act, delivering memorable performances well into his later years. Richard Burton's public drunkenness, 1970s. Another star of the 1960s and 70s, Richard Burton was infamous for his public bouts of drunkenness. Known for his turbulent relationship with Elizabeth Taylor, their fights were often fueled by alcohol. In 1974, during a visit to London, Burton was seen staggering out of a bar, barely able to walk. One notable incident occurred in 1975 when Burton was ejected from a theater after causing a scene during a performance. According to witnesses, he was shouting incoherently and had to be physically removed. The media had a field day, and the story was splashed across headlines. This public humiliation highlighted the extent of his alcohol dependency and its impact on his public image. Burton's drinking habits were well documented and became part of his public persona. He was often seen with a drink in hand at social events, parties, and even on film sets. His penchant for alcohol not only strained his relationships but also affected his professional life. Directors and co-stars often had to contend with his unpredictable behavior and frequent absences due to his drinking binges. Despite these incidents, Burton continued to work, though his excessive drinking affected his performances and health. His once powerful voice and commanding presence began to wane, and his roles became less frequent and less prominent. He starred in several notable films during this period, including The Exorcist II, The Heretic, and Equus, but his performances were often overshadowed by his off-screen antics. Burton's health deteriorated significantly due to his drinking. He suffered from liver cirrhosis and other alcohol-related illnesses, leading to multiple hospitalizations. Despite the toll on his body, Burton seemed resigned to his fate. He once said, "I was drunk for years. I was happy drunk," reflecting a sense of acceptance and perhaps denial of the severe consequences of his lifestyle. John Belushi's party lifestyle, 1980s. The beloved star of Animal House and the Blues Brothers, John Belushi had a reputation for hard partying that ultimately led to his tragic end. In the early 1980s, Belushi's drug and alcohol use was spiraling out of control. Known for his larger-than-life personality, Belushi often indulged in wild parties, which were infamous for their excess and debauchery. Belushi's reckless lifestyle came to a devastating halt in March 1982 when he was found dead in his bungalow at the Chateau Marmont Hotel in Los Angeles. The coroner's report revealed a lethal combination of cocaine and heroin, often referred to as a speedball. His sudden death at the age of 33 shocked the entertainment world and highlighted the dangers of Hollywood's party lifestyle. Belushi's struggle with substance abuse was well known among his friends and colleagues. Efforts were made to help him curb his addictions, but his escalating use of drugs and alcohol made it increasingly difficult. Mickey Rourke's downward spiral, late 1980s. A rising star in the 1980s with films like 9½ Weeks and Angel Heart, Mickey Rourke saw his career nosedive due to his off-screen behavior. In 1989, Rourke was arrested for public intoxication after a bar fight in Los Angeles. Witnesses described the scene as chaotic, with Rourke shouting and throwing punches. This incident was just one of many that highlighted his turbulent lifestyle. Rourke's behavior led to a reputation as a difficult and unreliable actor. Directors were hesitant to work with him, and his career suffered as a result. His erratic actions on set and frequent altercations with co-stars further tarnished his professional image. Rourke later admitted in interviews that his drinking and aggressive behavior were a form of self-destruction. "I was on a path of destruction, and alcohol was my fuel," he said. The late 1980s and 1990s were marked by a series of personal and professional setbacks for Rourke. His marriage to actress Deborah Feuer ended in divorce, and his subsequent relationships were equally tumultuous. His struggles with alcohol and substance abuse continued, leading to more arrests and a further decline in his career. The once promising actor found himself increasingly marginalized in Hollywood, with fewer roles being offered. Rourke's passion for boxing, which he had pursued before becoming an actor, resurfaced during this period. He returned to the ring in the early 1990s, hoping to escape his troubled acting career and personal demons. Although he achieved some success as a boxer, the sport took a physical toll on his body and further isolated him from the film industry. It wasn't until the 2000s that Rourke began to turn his life around. He sought therapy and gradually reduced his alcohol consumption. His comeback role in The Wrestler, 2008, marked a significant turning point, earning him critical acclaim and a Golden Globe Award. Despite his redemption arc, the damage to his career from his earlier behavior was significant and took years to repair. Robert Downey Jr. struggles, 1990. In the early 90s, Robert Downey Jr. was known for his incredible talent and growing career. However, his substance abuse issues became public knowledge in 1996 when he was arrested in Malibu. Found under the influence of drugs, he was driving erratically and speeding down Sunset Boulevard. Police found heroin, cocaine, and a .357 Magnum revolver in his car. Downey's arrest shocked the entertainment industry and his fans. His talent had been widely recognized, and he had been on a promising career trajectory with roles in films like Less Than Zero and Chaplin, for which he received an Academy Award nomination.
The incident in Malibu, however, marked the beginning of a very public struggle with addiction. Downey later said in a court hearing, "It's like I have a shotgun in my mouth, and I've got my finger on the trigger, and I like the taste of gunmetal," poignantly describing the grip addiction had on him. Despite repeated attempts at rehabilitation, his struggle with addiction continued. Between 1996 and 2001, Downey was arrested several times, each incident marking a significant low in his career. His arrests included a 1997 incident where he was found passed out in a neighbor's home, and a 1999 incident where he missed a court-ordered drug test, resulting in a jail sentence. His recurring legal issues led to his being fired from the television series Ally McBeal, a significant blow given his acclaimed performance on the show. The once bright star saw his career prospects dim as Hollywood studios and producers became increasingly reluctant to work with him due to his unpredictability and legal troubles. Throughout these years, Downey's talent remained evident, but his addiction overshadowed his professional achievements. His relationships also suffered, with his first marriage to Deborah Falconer ending in divorce partly due to his substance abuse problems. Despite the support of friends and family, Downey's path to recovery was fraught with setbacks.